With the big studios only putting out a few films a year now, and a lot of those having budgets between 200 and 300 million, I thought I'd have a look back at some of the older films to see what their budgets were like back in the day, and then compare them to a more modern version of that film, to see if budgets back then were astronomical. So we'd start off with something small like Deep Blue Sea from 1999, had a budget of $60 million. Adjusted for inflation, that's $110 million these days, which is quite a modest budget compared to the big tentpole films you get now. I was going to compare it to Deep Blue Sea, but that was a straight-to-video film, so I thought, well, the next best thing was The Shallows, which has been generally well received, but that was 2016, so adjusted for inflation, that only had a budget of $20 million, but then again, it only had one shark and one actress. So then I thought, well, let's have a look at a drama. So I went with Dances with Wolves from 1990. That only had a $22 million budget, and then you get a 3-hour epic out of that. Adjusted for inflation, that's just $51 million. Pocket money these days. So I compared that to The Hateful Eight, another one from 2016, and adjusted for inflation for that time, it's just $55 million, so it's about the same. So I thought, let's go big or go home. So I went with Armageddon, 1998. $140 million budget back then, which is where we get into the realm of a lot of digital effects. And in today's money, that would have been $261 million. So that one does seem to be trending correctly. So I compared it to Moonfall, which came out in 2022. That only had a budget of $150 million. So that one's quite small compared to Armageddon. I thought I'd look at a comedy. So let's say Coming to America, 1988. That had a budget of $30 million back then, so that equates to about $77 million now. And because Eddie Murphy was at the height of his fame, most of that probably went on him. So I compared it to Coming to America in 2021. Even though that was released direct to digital, that had a budget of $60 million, so a bit less than what the original was made for. Then I thought, let's have a look at RoboCop, 1987. That whole film was only made for $13 million back then, which equates to $35 million now. If they could make a RoboCop film now for $35 million, I'd be very impressed. And then they'd probably make that back in the first weekend. Because the remake of RoboCop from 2014 had a budget of $128 million. And you see how well that came out. And so finally, one of the big moneymakers, Terminator 2 from 1991 had a budget of $102 million. And that was unheard of back then. I think only Rambo 3 had about $80 million budget. So Terminator 2's budget, adjusted for inflation, is $227 million. So that is tracking about right. And Dark Fate from 2019, that budget was only $185 million, but there are a lot more special effects in that version. So I was quite surprised to realise that budgets haven't increased that much altogether, and it's just inflation. So thanks for watching. Here endeth the lesson.